Okay, we'll call this meeting to order. Looks like it's maybe 6:31 from here, the clock I'm looking at. Ask for the roll to be called, please.
Marsh,
Here.
Patterson,
Here.
Petrie,
Present.
Furtado, Goss,
Here.
King, Esri.
Here. I'll just make note, I know Stephanie sent me an email earlier this morning saying that she has she's teaching tonight, so she's not going to be here. And Kyle says, yeah, Robert has something else going on that he needs to be elsewhere as well. Move on then to, we do have a quorum as well, so that's good. Move on to approval of agenda and addenda. Moved by Ms. Petrie, seconded by Mr. Marsh. We'll make one change, according to Mr. Hall. The state's attorney's office under 10 would like to basically pull A, the cleanup of garbage and debris, and basically what is B on the addendum, you could say basically becomes A, the intergovernmental agreement between Champaign County and Sidney Township. So basically we have no A. It's kind of this, it was basically the same thing anyway, but we're doing it in form of an intergovernmental agreement, which you have at your desk. You should have a copy. So with that change, unless there's any discussion on that, if that's okay with everybody, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you. That passes. We'll move on to approval of minutes from the ELEC committee meeting, May 10th, 2018. Moved by Mr. Goss to approve. Seconded by Mr. Marsh. Any discussion on those? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you. Those pass. Public participation. There is no one here from the public. Any communications? Seeing none of on that, we'll move on then to line 7 from information only. We have A, the Champaign County MS4 Area Stormwater Program Unincorporated Environmental Justice Area Analysis for Year 5, which is April 1, 2018 through March 31st, 2019. And looks like Kate's going to handle that for us.
Okay, so this is just an update, and you should have the memo and the maps we're going to take a look at were in the packet, so it may be easier for you to see the details on the hard copy than the screen, but however that works out. So we did this last year, and this year we used the same methodology as last year, so we would have a directly comparable data set from one year to the next. And just to quickly review what the methodology was, the statute language suggests that we break down areas into qualifying, self-identifiable, and not qualifying based on the percentage of minority population and low-income population in each MS4 area compared to the state rates. So we did that comparison by the block group data, which is the smallest census geography that data is available in. So you will see on the maps that the block groups are larger than the MS4 areas that we looked at. So the MS4 designations are reflective of all of the block group area, not just the area that's shown on the map. So changes from this year to last year, since we now have 2 years of comparable data. This year we looked at 46 block groups as opposed to 48. Last year we had 2 that ended up in the mix that were identified as block groups to analyze because they were adjacent to MS4 areas but did not contain them. We caught those this year and took them out of the analysis because they weren't relevant. We had 3 block groups that became that rose in designation from self-identifiable to qualifying, and from not qualifying to self-identifiable. We had 4 that decreased either from qualifying to self-identifiable, qualifying to not qualifying, or self-identifiable to not qualifying. The remaining 39, so the vast majority of them that we looked at, had the same, fell into the same category as they did the previous year. So, yes.
I have a clarification
Sure.
question. As we read across this and read down on this, it's not clear to me where some of these shifted to.
What exactly do you mean?
Well, you went from 48 to 46. Did those 2 just drop out?
Oh, they dropped out of the not qualifying. That's the difference from 7 to 5 in the not qualifying MS4 areas.
And the same way with 32 to 30?
No, the 32 to 30 are actually here, that they decreased from qualifying to self-identifiable. So you see qualifying drops from 32 to 30, and self-identifiable goes up correspondingly from 9 to 11. The 2 that were taken out wholesale because they didn't contain an MS4 area, both of them were not qualifying last year. So that accounts for the drop from 7 to 5 in not qualifying.
Okay, I guess.
So the rest of the presentation, we just have the maps. Each map, we have the whole area, Champaign, Urbana, Savoy, Bonneville, and these come in pairs. The first map in each set shows the 2018 designation, whereas the second map shows whether each block group increased or decreased from last year. So here's the full area map, and my apologies. Here we have the full area change map, where you can see from the color coding that most of them stayed exactly as they were. This is easier to see when we get into the detailed area maps. The Champaign area, there's a pretty even distribution numerically over between qualifying and self-identification areas. And we can see when we go to the change map that was pretty varied as well about how those block groups behave from year to year. In the Urbana area, we see more qualifying areas than in Champaign. And we can also see that they largely stayed the same as well, although we have a couple here in sort of north central Urbana that increased in designation. Savoy, we have several large areas that fall into the qualifying category, and we can see that most of them did remain the same from one year to the next. We had one decrease in designation up here, which may be the cemetery, but I'm not absolutely positive that that's what that is. And finally, we have the Bonneville area, which you can see these are really small areas in this one, and largely just out along the roadway. They do qualify because the block groups that they fall within qualify, and this also remained largely unchanged from last year. And we're definitely looking forward to doing this in 2019 to have 3 continuous years of data to see changes over a longer period of time. And there is also a table in the memo on the second page of the memo that breaks down the changes by block group from year to year and category to category, in a much more detailed breakdown than the one on the first page of the memo that was featured in the presentation. So that's there for reference as well.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Is that all you've got as far as a presentation?
Yep.
Okay. Questions for Kate, discussion? John?
Well, I'm not on it. Well, I guess page 7, the overall EJ areas for unincorporated Champaign County. As it happens, the EPA has this requirement that you have to go through special measures to get input from the environmental justice areas. As it happens, although it's less this year than last, but still even this year, almost all of your MS4 area is an environmental justice area. And again, that's either because of low incomes or non-English speaking, or, that's not the technical term, but people having a first language other than English. Those things together means that when you send out the survey for the environmental justice area to meet this one little requirement, we're actually surveying your whole MS4 area, which is a good thing. If you want people to be informed, that's a good thing. It's actually having, I think, this one little requirement in the MS4 requirements, because of the nature of your population and their income and other characteristics, you're actually having to contact them every year. That can be a good thing. It can also lead to, unexpected costs, because these surveys are not cheap, although in terms of how much they cost, I think it's a great buy, but I think you should feel good that you're actually contacting almost, now again, you're sampling, so you're not contacting everybody, but you're sampling almost every part of your MS4 area. My hope would be that the EPA would, these permits run in a 5-year cycle. 2019 is going to be the 5th year in this cycle. 2020, we're going to have a new set of MS4 requirements. I hope the new set addresses whether they really want us to do this every year, or once every 5 years, once every 2 years, or only when there's a change. But as Kate has made clear, we see right here there was a change from this year to last year. So I don't know what I would recommend to the EPA if anyone asked me, but I would like to have a little more detail other than just the fact that we have to do this, and so therefore we have to do it every year. I would hope maybe once every other year would be sufficient, maybe once every 3rd year. So hopefully we can not have to do this so much in the future, but on the other hand, I think you can feel either good or at least, satisfied that this provides a way for these folks to comment. I was really surprised at the range of comments that Susan received in the surveys last year. Folks have, it's like we always learn at ZBA cases, everybody has something to say about drainage, no matter where they live. They know of a drainage problem, and this gives them a way to provide that information. I think that's good.
Further discussion? Go ahead, Patsy.
Well, one question to Kate, and then a comment to John, if you're ever asked for input in relationship to any changes that might come up at the end of this 5 years. Other than what you are showing to us, that some boundaries have changed and things like that, and I realize you only have 2 years worth of data, are there any other changes that you'd like to make us aware of?
No, everything made it to the presentation. There's also the raw data, I believe was in the packets, but we did our best to refine the important notes of the raw data and the overall themes of that into the maps. And by and large, the MS4 boundaries and the block group boundaries didn't change in and of themselves, but the distribution of the areas did.
Okay, all right, and input to EPA, should your opportunity be presented to you, and that is, I've been on this for a long time, and that there's a lot outside the determined MS4 area to the county boundary lines that I'm still interested in sometime getting that into what we're working on and not leave that out as it is presently.
Further discussion? Seeing none. Thanks again, Kate. And we will move on to B, the May 2018 residential electronics collection results. Go ahead, Ms. Susan.
Thank you. All right, so as you may have seen from the figures and the notes, total of 1,545 persons registered to attend the residential electronics collection in May. And I wanted to make another note right up front that we added an extra hour, so that's one reason you might recognize that the number is slightly more than in previous collections. And we did that to meet public demand because the slots for online registration filled up in a week to 10 days, and we had calls coming in at a high rate. So just made that choice internally, since the only cost was not any cost reflected financially other than staff volunteer time. So that point I wanted to make. And it was the second largest collection we've had for a single collection at 80.9 tons. Televisions collected represented 65% of the total weight of electronics collected, and that's sort of consistent with previous collections. And for the next collection in October, we're planning to increase the online registration slots per 15-minute increment from 85 to 110 to make up for the anticipated percentage of persons who will not attend, just based on trends. So we have this down, have a very efficient system for collection, and each time we have a collection, it gets even more efficient. So that's something we're quite proud of. Any questions? I'll take them.
Ms. Petrie.
Susan, just to get on the record and clarify what you said, you're going to overshoot due to data. But I thought you also were mentioning when we were working on the agenda for this meeting that the time increments, so the window of times, you were considering making those smaller, so that also will add to opportunities.
No, we're keeping the registration slots at 15 minutes.
Oh, you're
It's
not
like the
going
structure,
to 10.
but we're
Okay.
adding persons in each slot, participants
Okay.
that can register. We're increasing that.
Mr. Goss.
Just a quick question, because my time was later this year, and it didn't seem like I had to wait too much this year. What's the latest?
Okay, all right. So normally these are 4-hour collections from 8 to noon.
Okay.
This year, we added on an extra hour at the end.
I was
So-
in the last hour, so,
Yeah,
okay,
and
I
that
get
was
it.
sort of a slightly different format where we went down from 2 lines to 1 line. And there may have been a longer wait for that last hour because we had shutting down operations going on at the same time. So you're asking what? How long is the wait?
No, just simply the total amount of time. I thought actually this year I waited less than last, and
Yeah.
it seemed like maybe last year, maybe I had a 10:30 or 11 o'clock time. This time I had a 12:30, and it was very efficient. There were oodles of helpers. My wife was with me for the first time
Yeah.
and said, how does this happen? I said, we open the door and they take this stuff out and we drive away. It was very efficient.
Yeah.
I was very happy. I mean, it couldn't have worked better in my opinion. I was just curious how long it ran.
Thank you.
Mr. Weibel?
Susan, again, it was well run. Can you tell me the difference between gross total and net total and chart on page 25?
I can. Shall I? I'm just kidding. All right, so gross total and net total. I believe the gross total includes the weight of the vehicle. Okay, I had the same question.
Any further discussion on this item? Thank you, Susan, for that information. Move on then to C, the Bahama Aquifer Protection. Go ahead, Susan.
All right, so I have some information, just hot off the presses. We have the location of the next full task force full committee meeting on Monday, June 18th, and that will be at the Mahomet Seymour High School Auditorium in Mahomet. They will post that on their website eventually, soon, hopefully. And I'm talking about the IEPA Mahomet Aquifer Protection Task Force website. So, and just a few notes about some of the legislation that was proposed. One, Senate Bill 274 to extend the deadline from July 1st to December 31st has been delayed for some reason, and the official reason would be the House Committee Amendment Number 1, motion to concur assignments referred to the Environment and Conservation. So I have calls into Scott Bennett's office, and he'll provide an explanation that is understandable about their prospects for that extension of a deadline. Same kind of thing for the Senate Bill 3548 and 3549. Those are bills that pertain to the natural gas storage fields, notification requirements, and annual inspection requirements, and those have been re-referred to the Rules Committee. So those are making their way through the process. Probably will return sometime in the fall. But with regard to the deadline, that's something I can easily email to you once I get a status or an explanation of what their expectations might be. So finally, County Board member Chris Storr attended the subcommittee meeting on contamination threats that took place at Brookins here on May 21st. He is traveling this evening and was unavailable to attend tonight's meeting. So he requested that I try to share with you some concerns that he has about the information that subcommittee discussed at their May 21st meeting, and specifically with regard to legacy landfills. So legacy landfills are the former dumps, unlined sanitary landfills, and waste sites inventoried from Illinois EPA files during the 1980s. These legacy waste fills are covered up with as little as 2 feet of compacted cover, and the waste deposited in these structures were largely unregulated and likely include materials prohibited from disposal in Subtitle D landfills under current regulations. So there are legacy landfills from the Illinois EPA files not currently shown on the IEPA website, and for which IEPA is not actively tracking or inspecting. So Chris Storr, who is a landfill expert, if you haven't known that by now, indicates, well, he was at the subcommittee meeting, and the subcommittee member, one of them, was talking about 54 or so of these legacy landfills that they're looking at over the Mahomet Aquifer, and that was like a red flag to him. He knows of 218 landfills over the Mahomet Aquifer, 94 of which lie over shallow aquifers mapped within 20 feet of the land surface. So Chris was asked to testify regarding this information, and he has sent spreadsheets to George Roadcap and Rick Cobb at the Illinois EPA. George Roadcap is from the University of Illinois, Illinois State Water Survey. So Chris does spreadsheets with the locations of the 218 legacy landfills over the Mahomet Aquifer, And he has another spreadsheet with the locations of the 94 legacy landfills over the Muhammad Aquifer that also lie over the shallow aquifers. And those are the landfills that are of particular interest. So he wanted and asked me to share that information with you this evening. And I did. And I have copies of Chris Store's notes from that meeting. If you'd like to see those, just let me know. And that's it.
Thank you, Susan. Mr. Goss?
Did you say what time that meeting was on the 18th?
Usually these are scheduled for 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock.
Ms. Petrie?
It's very fortunate that Chris was at that meeting, it appears, since his data is so much greater than what was being presented. I have a clarification, though. You mentioned two different sets of data, one, 95, and the other. Is there an overlap in those numbers, or are those two distinctive sets, discrete sets of numbers?
There could be some overlap. I'd be happy to look at the spreadsheets more closely. The way they're described here are 218 of these over the Muhammad Aquifer, and then 94 of which lie over shallow aquifers
Right.
mapped. So I'm thinking
I'm
it's a-
kind of assuming that 94 is a subset
Right.
of the 218, but if you could just sometime
Yeah.
clarify it
Certainly
that
will
for
be.
us. Thank you.
Further discussion? Yeah, he's not here, but I would like to thank Chris Storr for attending these meetings and providing that information. That's great. And thank you, Susan, for passing it along. It's nice that, well, at least somebody has the information. You'd think the EPA should have it too. So if no further discussion on that, we'll move on then to D, fiscal year 2018 county planning contract status update. Go ahead, Susan.
Okay, so this is a chart that shows our progress in completing the 2018 county work plan to date, up until and through May 19th of this year. So we're approximately 53% complete with the fiscal year 2018 county planning contract work plan. And the second table shows detail of the LRMP portion of that work plan and the status of a completion of that. And that is estimated to be 66% complete. So I can say one reason for that higher percentage in late May could be that many of those hours toward electronics collections were used up this year quickly. So I have like 7 hours left to work on the rest of the year, but most of the work does occur at the beginning of the year for the planning and coordinating of the contracts and stuff for those collections. So,
Ms. Petrie.
Susan, previously you've talked about maybe there will be some changes in the collections. Do you have any more information about that? And do you think those changes will cause some rearrangement of the necessary hours for you to be involved?
okay, so you're talking about when the regulations of the Consumer Electronics Recycling Act kick in beginning January 1st. And right. So we have not been able to locate a program collection site, which would be one of our two means of collection, would be either the one-day collections or a program collection site. So we are still going to follow up this June with Goodwill to see if they are interested in serving as a program collection site, now that they have figured out what's going on, hopefully. And we will be in contact with them and try to pursue that and see how far we get. Otherwise, we need to look for funds to operate a program collection site. So it's not a free ride as far as you can have one program collection site and we will the manufacturers will pick up your collected TVs and arrange for that to happen, the recycling and transportation and processing of those. But the local governments would be responsible to fund operation of those sites. Some other counties, public works departments offer to do that kind of thing. For example, to answer the second part of your question, if we did have a program collection site, there would still need to be some staff coordination of operations. So it'd be a different kind of thing than coordinating a one-day collection. Maybe it'd be more difficult. I don't know. Thank you.
Well, I was just thinking ahead as we're working on the next contract, which would go into 2019 and cover that time period you are now referring to keep some of that in mind. We've made it easier to shift hours around than it was several years ago. So it isn't such a tight situation, but it's good to have those, have your comments in mind.
Anything else on this, further discussion? Thank you yet again, Susan, for that update. We'll then move on to item 8, or section 8, you could say. Items to be approved by ELUC. We have A, the Recreation and Entertainment License, Hudson Farm Weddings and Events, LLC, for live bands, DJ, yard games at the Hudson Farm, 1341 County Road 1800 East, Urbana, for May 14th, 2018 through December 31st, 2018. Moved by Mr. Goss, seconded by Mr. Marsh. I'll just note that if you've read the packet, this is for the first full year license, R&E license for this venue. Is there discussion on this? Ms. Petrie?
A question for Mr. Hall. Is the license fee still covering what you calculate is the cost to handle these and process these?
No, the license fee is limited by statute, but by the time you take this thing in and run it through ELUC, I'm sure it costs more than $104. But that's the maximum that's allowed by statute.
Okay, thanks.
Anything, Mr. Marsh?
I wasn't sure what you meant. You said that when this is their first year. They've been there a long time.
That it just opened up but
Well, I think they were in operation at least part of last year, but they didn't get a license for last year. But this year they got one in plenty of time. So we're only interested in compliance. So.
Maybe we should talk about
further discussion on this? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you, that passes. We'll then move on to B, a comprehensive update of the Champaign County Land Resource Management Plan that was adopted on 4/22/2001.
Actually, that should be 10.
Sorry, 10.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. I'm open for a motion, or if we want to have discussion first.
So moved.
Is there a second then? Seconded by Mr. Marsh. Okay, Patsy, do you want to start off on this
Yeah.
since you wanted to put this on the agenda?
Yes, I will. B and C are my suggestions on this agenda. The reason for B is that this plan has been in effect already, it will be 8 years, and in planning parlance, it is time for us to get into a timeline for the plan to be revisited. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will be totally rewritten, but visited. Over the years, it's been amended and amended many times, and after a point, so many of those, it's just in best practice to do that. Now, Mr. Hall pointed out to me, and I had missed this, on page 47, after our discussion during the ELEC agenda meeting, if you look at page 47, the last line in that matrix, well, not the very last line, second from the bottom line, they have added, prepare and submit a proposal to ELEC and County Board regarding an LRMP comprehensive update. And they put that in the work plan for our consideration, and that is a first step to doing a major look at the LRMP, and that I think Mr. Hall mentioned that the target would be 2020, or is it 2020? That's what I thought. And that would be a 10-year cycle for that, and it's just in the best interest of planning for the county and for Mr. Hall's office and for the others who work on planning for the county.
Thank you, Patsy. John, do you want to speak to this?
Well, yeah, when this was brought up and we thought about, okay, the LRMP calls for update sometime between year 10 and year 15, and before you can actually do the update, you have to have a proposal. Now, those proposals are pretty complicated, so they need to be a cost item. And so what you have before you is a proposal to do 100 years, 100 hours for a proposal in 2019 that could lead to then starting the update in 2020, which would be within that 10 to 15 year cycle. So I think I appreciate this being mentioned. This is a very timely thing. However, it's so timely, Susan and I really didn't have time to end up with a total proposed contract amount that was no increase over the 2018 contract. And so between now and August, when this thing will be back on the agenda, we're going to try to find a way to keep this part of the proposed work plan, but meet the no increase standard unless we find out that's not a requirement. But I think, as everybody knows, in the 2019 budget, non-staff items are not supposed to increase over 2018. So we're going to continue to work on this to try to meet that. But there's some other things that also weigh into that. I'll just leave those for Susan's discussion on the contract. I think there's another source of funding for some part of that proposed contract amount. But the point is, you know, hopefully we could find a way to include this work in the 2019 contract.
Yeah, I'll just note, so what John's mentioning, we're kind of getting into 9 a little bit, which is fine because it ties in, but just to make everybody clear that yes, we are kind of getting a little bit into 9 for the proposed 2019 contract. Further discussion, I don't know, Ms. Petrie?
Well, I just want to put on the record a thank you to Susan and John for working on this and thinking ahead on the timeline like you've done.
Go ahead, Mr. Goss.
Is this really an action item? I don't really think this is an action item at this point.
Then I withdraw my motion.
Okay, that's fine. It's fine, but yeah, if it's withdrawn, it's withdrawn. Okay. But I would assume, I mean, I'm definitely in favor personally. I mean, take a little bit being the chair, but I am in favor of definitely looking at this. I mean, if we can work it into the budget and everything to get it going. Further discussion on this, Susan, did you want to add anything at this point in time? Okay. Seeing nothing else on this one, we'll move on then to C, an additional full-time staff position for the Department of Planning and Zoning. Do you think we would need motion on this one, John, or do we want to or Mr. Weibel?
I think that this would be directions towards John Hall to prepare this when it comes to budget preparation.
So this is just,
It's directions for John. Would you agree, Mr. Hall?
Well, it would be, yeah. I,
From the committee to you.
yes.
So we'd want a motion, or just, could be inform, if we, just consensus, yeah. So, okay, this again is brought forward by Ms. Petrie, so I'll let her speak to it next.
Okay, I will speak to this. It took me about 3 to 4 years to get a half-time position in John's office expanded to full-time, so I figured I better start now in helping expand his office. He only has 5 people working on the issues of planning and zoning for the county, and then we have the contract with the folks over at RPC. And as somebody reminded me, until the city of Champaign's planning department expanded to economic development, they had a full staff of 12, and now they have a full staff of 20. And we are definitely short shrifting planning and zoning and staffing. And so my argument is that I'd like to see this, or the ELEC approve Mr. Hall preparing a memo to have this in the 2019 budget for discussion at budget time, so we can maybe figure out a way to provide some funding for him to expand his office by 1.
John, do you want to speak to this, or, I mean, I've just give you your chance now if you want to.
Okay, well, when this was mentioned to me, I went around to each person in our office and I said, you know, am I overlooking something here? Do we need more people? And I was reminded that, at least in regards to enforcement, we are so burdened in enforcement that we are not known for quick response times. You hear people coming to county board meetings almost every month talking about how long it takes us to respond to complaints. Now, to be fair, a lot of that is all we can do is ask someone to clean up their property. We cannot make someone clean up their property. But I would not be honest with you if I didn't say we cannot respond. We can't even make those requests, those asks, as timely as what we would like, because we have a full-time person, the zoning officer, who does that full-time. The senior planner assists regularly on other prominent cases. I will get involved when I have time on a prominent case, but probably 95% of this work is done by the zoning officer. The senior planner and myself, we add 5% over the course of a year. Sometimes those are important cases, and so that is important work. But the point is, and I don't know if this is a hangover from the Great Recession and from the time period when we were changing zoning administrators almost yearly. We built up a backlog. The Great Recession hit. We had even more problematic properties. So the consensus of everyone in our office is the public would benefit from having more staffing on enforcement. Now, the thing is, in the budget process, we're trying to reconcile budgetability with county board goals. And so I can't say that this doesn't meet the county board goal, because I don't know what the county board goal is. I believe our nuisance ordinance, you know, it has been amended over the years. People come to this committee, they ask for changes. They certainly have not gotten all the changes they've asked for over the years. This committee has, over the years, determined that they just could not provide services that people wanted. But as in the experience with landscape burning a couple years ago, we added that as a new service. That really has gone very successfully. During the fall and the spring, when we get burning complaints, we respond. The bigger problem are all these nuisance properties that are not seasonal. They happen throughout the year. We can't respond quickly enough for those. I don't know that that's indeed a whole nother full-time staff position. One thing I do plan on including in this year's budget, you may recall that the state's attorney's office won a really large award of penalties against a landowner who had had a long-standing problem. We're talking about, something more than $100,000. Those long-standing problems were part of the nuisance ordinance regulations. I think they were directly related to lack of a building code. We have not yet received the penalties that were imposed by the court. We should receive those in August. When we receive those penalties, I will be making a proposal to adopt a building code. The penalties that were imposed by that court, even if the landowner pays them, I don't want you to think they're enough to pay for a building code. They're not permanently, but they will certainly pay for that initial adoption in the first couple of years. That would help with enforcement, because we certainly don't need a full-time person on building code. I think there could be a sharing like we do in so many places. The senior planner shares with enforcement when she has time. Building code position could share with enforcement. And so I think that will be part of the budget. I'm not going to propose that until we get those funds. And so do we need more staffing? Well, more staffing would be able to provide more timely enforcement for things related to the nuisance ordinance. I don't know if those were the concerns that Ms. Petrie was thinking about when she asked for this to be on the agenda, but when I talked to everyone in our department, that is the one place where they could see a misfit between what the public expects and what we can do. So that's all I can say about that.
Ms. Petrie.
I don't see a handout from John. I had sent him a message asking for him to copy his interview that appeared in the Farm Bureau magazine, which outlines all the responsibilities of that office and what they oversee. And I would hope that should we encourage him to prepare a memo for the 2019 budget, that he includes those in that memo, because I am certain that most, and even some of us, do not realize exactly what this department oversees over the course of a year, and it's a long list, and there's many obligations, and I will continue to argue that the department is understaffed.
And I should mention that last year, the county board was good enough to give us the funding to move what was then an intern position to a full-time position. This was our main staff person for the MS4 program, but that person does not work full-time on the MS4 program. We're letting that person take up the slack on some of the inspections from permitting that interns had done in previous years. I haven't made that that sharing as full as it will be eventually, because we're still We're still meeting our deadline with the EPA in regards to our storm sewer system map, and this summer, most of the time is going towards meeting that deadline. But once we can say that we have a first draft, 100% of our storm sewer system map, then we will be spending more time on permitting inspections and also on enforcement. So again, I can't say this enough. It is a management challenge trying to work with these 5 positions we have, spread them out amongst all of our various obligations to make sure that, you know, we're doing the best job possible. It is a challenge. And again, I know we're not providing the response on enforcement that citizens expect right now. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But I did want to thank you for that, the help on the MS4 program, because that was important. It's helping us meet our deadlines for the EPA, and once those are done, that will be helping with other office responsibilities.
Further discussion. Not seeing anybody, I guess, speak out against it. So, I mean, this would just be obviously working it up to put into the budget. It's not, it's not obviously not a done deal, because the budget is just the beginning of the budget process, but this is the time to start doing it if we're going to. So, not seeing anything negative, I guess, coming out about it. I guess looks like it's pretty well accepted to go ahead and let Mr. Hall.
I understand the committee wants me to, you know, make a request if there is a need, and that only makes sense. So.
Well said. Thanks, John. So with that, we'll move on then to we have the one addendum item of the 2 addendums. We have D, the Recreation and Entertainment License, Fisher Community Fair, 226 East Sangamon Avenue, Fisher, for July 10th through July 14th, 2018. Moved by Mr. Goss, seconded by Ms. Petrie. Discussion on this. Not really expecting any, but be fine if there is. Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you. That passes. Now then, we are on to 9 items to receive and place on file by ELUC to allow a 60-day review period. We have A, the proposed fiscal year 2019 Champaign County Regional Planning Commission planning contract for Champaign County. Is there a motion? Moved by Ms. Petrie. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Goss. Discussion on this. Susan, do you want to speak to this first?
Thank you. So, as in previous years, we come forward to ELUC in June and present an initial proposal for a county planning work contract between the RPC and the county. And so that is what you're looking at, and you will have 1 or 2 months, and we will have 1 or 2 months to make any adjustments based on comments we would receive to this proposed contract from you all. So it's put out there for your initial review, and you'll see that it does start off with a requested increase, and yes, I am aware of the directive that non-personnel expenditures be held flat against fiscal year 2018 budget, which last year was a total of $85,610, and this year we're starting off with a request to increase that. So my explanation for why that is happening is some of the work in this contract relates to solid waste management, and there is a separate solid waste management fund, 676, which is depleting, but which does have some limited capacity to handle these requested increases. And I'll make a note right off the bat that we still need to discuss this with administrative services. And so it's not been vetted completely by those persons. So those are my initial comments. So the first, it's presented in two proposals. Proposal A, which is a small increase amount of 1.7%, and that is to provide most of the items indicated here in Budget A. It's the 85,000 carried forward from the amount from fiscal year 18 plus a little bit more in order to add that 100-hour work item to look at the LRMP and make a proposal to do a comprehensive update of that, just to develop the proposal and present that during fiscal year 2019 for your consideration. So that is the slight increase in Proposal A. And so Proposal B is a more significant request for an 8.2% increase, and that would be approximately a $7,000 increase in the contract, and that would be to allow for a new proposal that's coming forward to you. Probably you'll see it this August, if not in July, and that is to establish a municipal joint action agency to address a need in the community that has been identified for household hazardous waste collection. So that agency would be established, and this amount of money in Proposal B would be the county's share of support for that agency as far as a facilitator is needed for that agency. Some of you may know that the county in 2005 designated the county planner at the time, myself, to serve as the solid waste coordinator, recycling coordinator for the county, and still as an RPC planner, that is a function that I continue on, and that's reflected in the contract as well. So I am proposed to be the person who would facilitate that municipal joint action agency. Proposal for that agency has just been developed and is currently being reviewed by the state's attorney's office and by some task force members and key staff. So the proposal, I hope, will be released this July, and it involves including RPC member agencies as the municipal joint action agency. That would be Champaign County and the 6 largest communities in Champaign County to be a part of that agency and oversee a program to provide household hazardous waste collection program here in Champaign County. So I'll stop talking. This is an initial proposal for your initial review, and lays out the work plan items, overall work plan, and then it breaks it down into the LRMP portion of that work plan. So I'll receive any questions you may have.
Ms. Petrie.
Okay, quick math in my head. If you have $7,000 here and you said we're one of 6, or are we one of 7? One of 6.
One of 7.
One of 7. Okay, well, that means that we're talking about a need of $50,000, or
It's approximately $43,000. It would fund a quarter-time position, approximately. And it's a one-time fiscal year 2019 kind of request. It likely would go down in subsequent years. So I don't want to talk too much about that proposal right now because I want you to have the full information about that proposal, and this is just a proposal that allows for that to occur once you see it. You know what I
okay.
mean?
I'll wait till I can read your complete memo then. Thank you.
Further discussion on Mr. Weibel.
As a point of information, I believe you have to select A or B. Is that correct?
I thought they were
That's-
both going
yeah.
out for 60 days.
This is to be held
Oh, so both
for
go out.
60
Okay.
days, and
All right,
then
I'm sorry.
likely in August, we
Okay.
will come back with a third option.
Okay,
No increase, which are,
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, definitely, thanks for that clarification. Further discussion? Again, yeah, this is just going out for review, like was just said, for 60 day. All part of the budget process.
Just a comment, the budget process it really has to identify the key things for our county, and every department has needs. Everyone wants more control or more jurisdiction or more review. And not that any of those aren't needed or good, but, we are in the midst of dodging hopefully dodging the worst financial crisis we've had in years. And I think we should, especially going into this next year, be very careful going forward, because we have so many back things that we haven't paid for, that haven't been taken care of for years. And again, not to disparage anything here, because we do have needs going forward to help things better, but I think we need to stabilize in the budget process and be very cautious in saying, now let's add another agency, now let's add this, now let's add this. Let's clean our house up first, is my only public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Any last comments on this discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. We moved to, yeah, this is receive and place on file for the 60 days. So, yeah, so we'll do that again. All in favor, just clarify, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you. That passed. Now then, we are on to 10, which, as I said, what was A is basically gone, and we're doing it as the addendum B as an intergovernmental agreement. So I'll read from the we have 10B, which you could say is now A. But anyway, an intergovernmental agreement between Champaign County and Sydney Township for cleanup of garbage and debris at 2141 County Road 1000 North, Sydney. Is there such a motion? Moved by Ms. Petrie. Seconded by Mr. Marsh. I'll make a comment. We do have Mr. Tim Osborne in the audience, Sydney Township Supervisor. I believe he's here to answer questions if we have any. Is that correct, Tim? I don't know if you've read the agreement or read the packet. In essence, Champaign County has the authority to do this. Granted, we don't have the money, or really and truly we don't. It's not in the budget, definitely, at this point in time. The proposal is, since we have the authority, in essence, Sydney Township is willing and has to put the money forward to clean this property up, being an agent, you could say, of the county, using our authority, but they would do the hard work and put the money out there, and then I believe probably put a lien on the property and go from there. So that's my little condensed version of it. Go ahead.
This is a problem property. We have never included it on a list because I thought that it was still active, but in fact, the state of Illinois has had this property under suit for several years, but the state of Illinois is not going to clean up this property. And so this is in the unincorporated area. Getting it cleaned up would be a great thing. There still needs to be a resolution for this agreement, but what's before you tonight is just literally the agreement. This agreement was drafted this week. When I reviewed it, I found a couple of typos, and I'll pass those along to the state's attorney's office. This was put together by the state's attorney and the township attorney. And so we're trying to get something in place so this property can be cleaned up as soon as possible.
Mr. Weibel.
Obviously, this looks like there's truck parts on there. What is that? What the garbage consists of, or is it lots of other stuff?
There's a lot of fill. There's a lot of tires. Who knows what's in the fill? Maybe a couple of buildings, demolished buildings buried. I mean, there's just, and most importantly, we need a gate so people stop dumping there. Well, a couple of gates, I guess.
I believe the chair's name is misspelled.
I'll pass that along to the state's attorney's office.
Mr. Goss.
Yeah, I visited this site yesterday, and it is a complete disaster. I mean, I knew we didn't have the money to clean it up, but I certainly sympathize with the residents and the folks out in Sydney. It's a complete disaster. It has been. I mean, I've been by it before, but honestly didn't pay attention because I don't live there. But yesterday I stopped there, looked at it. It's worthy of getting cleaned up. If we can work together with Sydney Township to do this, it certainly benefits the entire county.
Ms. Petrie.
Well, since a gentleman from Sydney made the trip here, I do want to thank Sydney for the cooperation. And once it gets cleaned up, there's going to be a lien on it. And then as that gets settled, if there's any money, will that go back to Sydney to help, to the township, I mean, to help cover some of the expenses you're willing to put forward to get this job done? Yes, okay.
Yeah, Tim, just so that's on the record, and since it's on being recorded and such, if you just turn the microphone on.
So the plan is to clean up the property. We will lien the property. The property already has about $170,000 worth of liens against the 4 acres.
Okay.
With federal tax liens, state employment tax liens, local banks, local guarantors. So the property will never be sold as the current owner has it. He can never get himself out of these liens. So the plan with the state's attorney and working with John is that we'll do the cleanup. We've estimated it probably between $30,000 and $50,000. We'll lien the property once we're done, and we know that there's a 99.9% chance that we're never going to get our money back. We will foreclose on the property, and we will take clean deed for our cleanup services.
Thanks for the explanation, and thank you again for being willing to work on the project in conjunction with Mr. Hall's office.
Yep, John's been great to work with. Jacob at the state's attorney's office has been great. It is a huge eyesore in our town. Every taxpayer will be very pleased once it's cleaned up. But like John said, it gets worse every week. I constantly chase people out of there just driving by and seeing somebody come out, dumping mattresses, TVs. There's one old semi-trailer that's parked off to the east side by the railroad, and you can barely get to it. And I finally got to it the other day, and it is 90% full of used semi-tires. So it just kind of keeps getting worse, but we need to get on it as soon as possible to stop the bleeding. I mean, it just keeps getting worse every week.
Mr. Marsh.
Are you aware of any true environmental problems there in terms of gas oil in the soil or anything in that, to that level?
No, I've spoke with the EPA about that, and they're not concerned about any soil contamination on the property. There might be a house buried under some fill sitting there, and I've talked to the EPA about disposing of that, and they're pleased to work with us on getting it cleaned up. And they're still, I mean, the landowner is not off the hook. This by no means gets him off the hook. The liens will still be there. They'll go to him personally, and the EPA are still coming after him. We're just doing it for the community. It's just, you drive by it every day. It's right on the edge of town. Kids are down there kicking in the doors. There's obviously partying going on down there all hours of the night. It's a bad situation.
I'll just add that this is in my district. I drive by it relatively frequently, and yes, I can agree it's a definite eyesore. But like Mr. Goss, until like hearing this from Tim, who's who I mainly heard it from originally, didn't realize it was quite as bad as it is. It's one of those, yes, it's not pretty, but I guess you see it, it's ugly, and you just kind of drive by it because it's ugly, and it has been for a while. I remember it first as a fertilizer business. It was a Sahigro, then it went to Pierce Fertilizer, and I don't remember if Bryant Trucking was the next one after that, or if there might have been something else in between. But yeah, when you hear from Mr. Osborne just how bad it is and with the kids and everything, yeah, this would be a good thing to do if it can get done. Any further comments or anything else you'd like to say, Tim, while you're up here?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Tim. Yeah, thanks for being willing and coming in here. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you. That passes unanimously. Okay, we have then number 11, other business, approval of closed session minutes from the May 10th, 2018 meeting. No. What's that? No, Brooks saw it. I believe, yeah, it's made it all the way through the committee members. So moved by Mr. Goss to approve, seconded by Ms. Petrie. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you. That passes. Chair's report. I'll just make a note that oftentimes we're have a resolution to cancel the July meeting and handle anything at the regular full board meeting. It's hoped by, and it is hoped by me too, in this one instance that hopefully ZBA will have a solar ordinance for us to deal with in July. So that's why we don't have that on the agenda. They have 2 meetings in June here to hopefully get the ordinance done. It may only take one, it may take both. But if they don't get it done in June, we may be just going ahead and canceling July, because I don't think, other than that, it didn't sound like there was necessarily anything planned that would be worthy of a meeting. But the big thing would be the solar ordinance, if that gets out of ZBA and pushed on to us, to start that process of getting it through the county board and fully adopted in as an ordinance, whatever the ELUC and then board would choose to do with that. So that's why that's not on the agenda. Then move on to designation of items to be placed on consent agenda. There was only really one that could possibly fit that, and it does do that because it was passed unanimously, the intergovernmental agreement. So 10B, if you go by the addendum. Those are approved by ELUC, just approved at the committee level. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Mr. Brooks, seconded by Ms. Petrie. We're adjourned. Thanks.